Welcome, welcome, and thank you for joining us for our Best of Showcase. My name is Alexis Foley, and I am an educational program coordinator with a cool eye, and I am so happy to have you here with us today. I am going to introduce our speaker today from the Northwest Akuho region. Allie is a disabled queer housing operations professional living in the Pacific Northwest. Though born and raised on the East Coast, outside of Philly, Allie now calls Oregon home. When she isn't working or advocating for accessibility and inclusion, Allie likes to read, watch movies, and photograph. Allie has been a great volunteer for Cool Y. And so we just want to give our appreciation to her, not only for this, but for her support of a Cool Y. So thank you so much, Allie. And I'm going to pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Alexis. Good afternoon, everyone. I don't know what the heck is going on with my Zoom. I keep trying to hide the bar and it keeps moving back where I don't want it. So we're going to deal with some technical difficulties. Well, thank you all for joining me here. I am presenting to you live from Corvallis, Oregon today. And today we will be talking about supporting disabled employees and colleagues on college and university campuses. As Alexis said, my name is Allie Garry. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the apartment living manager at Oregon State University. The slides that you'll see today are cream color with charcoal text. The headings are in handwritten font, while the body text is in a sans serif font. Each slide features illustrations of a variety of people with disabilities of all backgrounds. Some folks have prosthetic limbs, some are missing limbs entirely, some are using mobility aids, and some have other visible disabilities. Okay. Before we get started today, I wanted to know that this is your space and you are free to use it as needed. If you want to add the Zoom captioning, it has been enabled, but there should be captioning showing on your screen for my presentation. If you can only participate via chat, absolutely no worries. If you need to have your camera off, that is okay. We are all busy. I will not be offended if folks are like, I'm just here to listen. I'm not going to be able to participate. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about our learning objectives for today. So this presentation was originally done for the Northwest Association of College and University Housing Officers. So we focused on defining the Americans with Disability Act, the Accessible Canada Act, accommodations, and compliance. Folks also should be able to examine a current procedure in their role for accessibility and inclusivity. We'll see if we get there. And you'll be able to apply at least one strategy to your role to improve accessibility for your employees and coworkers. So here's a little bit about what we'll be covering today in our short time together. One, backgrounds and definitions, a little bit about me, some common terms. We'll do some procedures and protocols, what is specifically required in the United States and Canada. We'll go above and beyond. How can we move beyond what's required to better support folks? We'll have some scenarios where folks can practice, and then we will have an opportunity for folks to talk about takeaways and what we've learned here today. Does that sound good to folks? Yeah? Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Corey. I appreciate the thumbs up and the nod. Excellent. So, some common terms and a little bit about me. When you first look at me, one of the first things you see about me is that I use a wheelchair or a cane. I am an ambulatory wheelchair user, which means I have use of my legs and can walk, but I still need mobility aids. This photo shows me in a wheelchair in the redwoods, posed with my arms outstretched. Here are some things you don't see when you first look at me. I am a huge Halloween lover who comes up with silly costumes for multiple days throughout October. This past year, I had 12 days of costumes. And this photo shows me dressed as wheelchair Barbie with her service dog in Barbie Land. You also don't see that I'm a Star Wars fan when you look at me. My corgi is named Boba Fett, and I have a lightsaber tattooed on my finger. This photo shows me dressed as Leia Solo with my fingers pointed upwards. I'm also an art. This image is of three Furbies riding motorcycles surrounded by fire. It's called This Is Fine, and I made it during the elections results process in 2024. A few more things that you won't see looking at me. You won't see my pain levels, my brain fog, my exhaustion, and how I work 100 times harder than some of my peers and colleagues to prove myself to make sure no one ever says, oh, Allie's out sick again, or oh, Allie missed this. And it connects that piece to me being disabled. I manage a bunch of symptoms and issues all day, every day, and I work very, very hard to mask this. Why do I tell you this? Mostly to provide a bit of understanding and empathy. A lot of people you interact with may have invisible disabilities or things that you can't notice right away, but that doesn't mean they aren't managing chronic pain or other issues. It's important to know that not all disabilities can be seen and that many folks work hard to hide them to avoid being treated differently. So let's talk about some common terms that we're going to use today. ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, was established in 1990. Oh, wow. That says 1900. That is incorrect. Sorry. It's a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in many areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and many public and private places that are open to the general public. The ACA, or the Accessible Canada Act, started in 2019, and it benefits all Canadians, especially persons with disabilities, through the proactive identification, removal, and prevention of barriers to accessibility in 7 areas. Um, Employment, the built environment, and communication technologies. Um, Sorry, my notes are a little bit funky right now. Um, so it focuses on 7 areas, sorry. Um, and what is fascinating about the ACA is that it was developed in 2019. Prior to that, there were no real rules or restrictions for Canada around accessibility. So some other common terms, disability. It has a few definitions which can add a lot of complexities for diagnosis, government funding, and treatment. The ADA defines disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. The dictionary defines disability as a condition that damages or limits abilities, unable to do things in normal ways. This can often make people think that disability is a bad thing, which is not true. Accessibility focuses on enabling for people with disabilities or enabling access through the use of assistive technology. And then compliance, as we're going to talk about it today, refers to the adherence to applicable laws such as ADA and ACA. With the new administration in the United States, it is a little bit hard to know how long the Americans with Disability Act will continue to be relevant in our work. While the future is uncertain, these are the guiding laws in the US currently, and we will also be discussing what is required in Canada. So both the ADA and ACA aim to prevent discrimination against people with disabilities and to ensure equal access to services, employment, and public spaces. The ADA is enforced by the US Department of Justice, while the ACA is overseen by the Canadian Accessibility Commissioner. So they have someone in Canada that is specifically dedicated to accessibility that oversees this. The compliance piece with ADA requires colleges and universities to ensure that students with disabilities have equal access to to educational programs and activities as their non-disabled peers. So this includes physical accessibility, which is making sure buildings, classrooms, and facilities are accessible to people with disabilities. Communication access, providing aids and services to help our students with hearing, vision, or speech disabilities to communicate effectively. This can include sign language interpreters, braille, electronic formats, and assistive listening devices. And then equal participation to ensure that students with disabilities have the same opportunity to obtain the same educational outcomes and level of achievement as students without disabilities. The ADA also applies to employment, state and local government, public accommodations, commercial facilities, transportation, and telecommunications. There's a variety of documents associated with ADA to ensure that folks are in compliance with the specifics related to these categories. I'm not going to bore you with these details because it's a lot. And to be honest, most of us are not doing the specific compliance work that's often handled by other people at other institutions. So the Accessible Canada Act requires colleges and universities to prepare accessibility plans. So they're required to consult with people with disabilities to create plans that show how to find, address, and prevent barriers. And these plans must be updated every 3 years. They're also required to provide feedback mechanisms to make it easy for people with disabilities to provide feedback on potential accessibility issues. Canada really wants to hear from folks with these lived experiences to ensure that they're staying at a level where people can still access things. They also have to comply with accessibility standards. The latest approved version of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or the WCAG, is the approved standard. So they have to comply with that. They have to accommodate disabled students. Most colleges and universities have a designated office to help our students with disabilities. And this office can collect the documentation about the disability, identify their needs and limitations, and recommend accommodations. And then lastly, folks are required to make online request forms accessible. If you use an online form for people to request alternate formats, you have to make sure that the form is accessible. Remind people that they can request alternate formats through other means. So if the form is not something that is helpful for them to use, there has to be another way they can do it. You have to indicate like a phone number or an email address, another way that they can access this. And you only ask for personal information that is needed to fulfill the request. So you're not collecting information about their disability or those types of things. You're just collecting the information that's needed to fulfill it. The the ACA also requires organizations to treat everyone with dignity, ensure everyone has equal opportunities, involve people with disabilities in the creation of laws, policies, and programs, and aim for the highest level of accessibility. The Accessible Canada Act, though they were a little bit late to getting started in doing this, they really have some good things built in there to try to learn from folks' lived experience instead of just guessing what people are going to need. So the Americans with Disability Act and the Accessible Canada Act, as well as other acts like this in other countries and regions, provide a floor that we have to meet. But it's not the limit for where we should stop or how to be truly inclusive. Laws are usually imperfect political compromises. So we don't say something like, we strive to be legally compliant or we strive to meet the ADA. We say something like, while we work hard to ensure compliance with ADA and ACA and other disability-related laws, we recognize that inclusion and accessibility require that we strive to do better, to go beyond legal standards, to create an institution that reaches for the ceiling instead of resting at the floor. These three topics here can be interrelated, but it can also be thought of as compliance as the floor, inclusion and justice as the ceiling, and accessibility as an in-between helping us push for inclusivity. Accommodations are a really good example here. Employees and students have the right to an accommodations process, but accommodations are a minimum reactive approach. Whereas if we focused more on the designs of our workplaces and proactive inclusivity, we can provide more workplaces that are compliant, accessible, and inclusive with less need for accommodations. Um, Something to note when folks go through like an accommodations process. Let's say that you're supervising a professional staff member and they come to you and say, "Hey, I have this request. Could we make this accommodation?" Most institutions will say, don't deny anything without talking to the folks on campus that actually can approve these things. Um, so if you want to approve something, you can do it without the input. But a lot of times, if you are like your instinct is to say no, and that's not going to be able to happen, you want to consult with the folks on your campus. We have an organization on our campus called EOA, and they're the people that we would consult with if we were thinking like, we want to deny this. Nope, let's talk with them and see what we can do. Okay, key accommodation points. So, Title I of the ADA and Accessible Canada Act SC 2019 C10, Section 5, both focus on employment. Private employers, state and local governments, employment agencies, and labor unions are required to provide reasonable accommodations in all job aspects. This does not relieve an employee or an applicant from an essential job function. Folks have the same expectations, but are able to receive an accommodation to successfully complete them. Every situation and accommodation request is case by case. What works for one person may not work for another. Okay, I should have been clicking as I went. Okay, so here are some additional common terms when looking at accommodations and requirements. So the ADA requires there to be effective communication. So this means that communication with people with disabilities must be as effective as communication with others. This applies to Title II, state and local government services, and Title III, public accommodations and commercial facilities. Personal services is another piece of the ADA. So, my institution, OSU, is not generally required to provide these personal aids and services, but we are required to allow them. So, your institutions may have different requirements, but generally, uh, we have to allow these things, even if we are not the ones providing them. And then reasonable accommodations are modifications or services that enable equal opportunity. So the idea of an accommodations process is that it's an interactive process. So it usually requires that all parties engage in the conversation, and it's not just one-way communication of like person who's requiring this is only is just saying like this is what I need and like that's the end all be all. Or the supervisor saying I can't do that and that's the end of it. It's an open conversation to figure out what's going to work for the needs of the department, for the position, and for the person. So we could spend the rest of this time talking about the specifics of this and why certain things are required and why others are not. And if you want more information about it, I'm happy to provide more resources at the end of the presentation. However, let's get into some like more exciting things, right? So when an employee reaches out with an accommodation request, um, make sure you communicate. Oftentimes, folks will start by reaching out to their supervisor, but it's not required, right? They can go above the supervisor and talk to someone else. Um, and if they connect with you first, try to offer some resources to them, right? Like, how can we get them connected? How can we see like what options are available, especially if you have no idea where to go? Um, Respond promptly, even if your answer is, I'll check in on that. Try not to just let that sit even if you're working on it, right? Try to have that open communication and dialogue. So at Oregon State University, man, I missed a U on that too. Um, we have the Equal Opportunity and Access Office that we engage in our process. Some Canadian institutions have something called the Center for Workplace Accessibility. So every institution has a different title for what it is called when you are referring employees. So make sure that you try to stay up to date on that. Um, Try to discuss with the employee what they need, if especially if it's unclear when they're requesting it, but don't collect their medical information. Like that is not your job. If the person wants to tell you about some of those things, that's totally okay, but you should not be collecting any documentation or like notes that say like this has to happen and here's why. Um, if the accommodation is easy to do or could be done without someone else or could be done for someone else without an accommodation, just do it, right? So if someone has a request to work from home on certain days, and that's a request that you would approve for anyone else without having to go through an accommodations process, do it. If you aren't sure what to do or don't have the funding, try to contact the campus resources for support because generally they can assist you in that process. Okay, additional accommodation considerations. So, reasonable accommodation is a legal term in the United States. Things are not considered reasonable when the request alters the essential functions of the position, when it would be significantly difficult or expensive to do, or when there is an actual, not speculative, risk to safe operations. And then remember to always engage your employee assistance office if you need assistance. Okay, I've talked a little bit about what's required. I've been talking a lot at you all. So let's talk about some specific things that we can do that don't require accommodations to make spaces more accessible and inclusive. So I'm going to focus on ways to support folks with non-apparent or invisible disabilities, as we often focus on supporting folks with visible disabilities. So though some intellectual and developmental disabilities are considered visible, some are also considered non-apparent. Intellectual and developmental disabilities are defined as a disability that affects the acquisition of knowledge and skills. In particular, any various neurodevelopmental conditions affecting intellectual processes, educational attainment, and the acquisition of skills needed for independent and social functioning. There is a criteria that was established by the American Association of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities to define like how folks fall into this category. So the IQ of the person needs to be below 70. There are significant limitations in adaptive behavior in one or more of the following areas. So conceptual, social, or practical skills. So things that are needed to live, work, and exist in the community. And the condition has to manifest itself before the age of 22. Some people might see IDDs as something negative. There was a study conducted in 2021 asking folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities to share their character strengths. Folks shared their strengths as their love of learning, honesty, appreciation of beauty, excellence, kindness, and fairness. So here's some things that we can do to support our employees with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Discuss with the person confidentially the best way to communicate instructions. Like, probably not the best thing in the middle of a staff meeting to single someone out and say, hey, what's the best way for me to do this for you? No, let's set up a meeting and talk with the person. Um, they may include written, verbal, visual strategies, or a combination of several modes of communication. A tape recorder or email might be useful for relaying instructions in some instances. These folks also probably have developed methods that have worked for them. You want to try to get feedback from the person to determine if they understand the instructions completely. So you provide the instructions and then you say, does this make sense? Could you like reiterate to me what we're going to be doing just to make sure that everybody's on the same page? You also want to be patient when the person begins a new job. As much as possible, our jobs are stressful, right? But if we can, try to decrease their stress levels by assigning tasks they can accomplish and that build on their strengths. We also want to avoid spontaneous changes in the work schedule and environment. Again, our jobs are very sporadic sometimes and things happen. But if you're able to keep up with a consistent routine, that is best for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. If you have the ability, try to reduce time pressures, and give assignments and tasks early so that way the person can pace themselves. How many folks have heard of the term neurodivergence, neurodivergency, neurodivergent? Yeah, seeing some nods and hands up. Okay, so this refers to people who process information in a different way that's not typical for their age. This variation could include like diagnosed conditions like autism or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. But neurodivergence itself is not a diagnosis. It just means that the brain works differently than what's considered typical. It's neither right nor wrong. So here are some things that we can do to support our neurodivergent colleagues and employees without them having to ask. Let folks know they don't need to sit at their desk. Can they stand? Can they move around while there's a meeting? Are there fidget items that folks are allowed to use? Are we providing agendas in advance? If not, consider is that something that we can do? Have direct communication. Avoid using metaphors. Try to get to the point while still being empathetic. Just because we're being direct does not mean that we're being mean. Share things in writing when possible, especially as a follow-up to ensure folks are on the same page. So if you just had a really large meeting or a lot of information was conveyed and it wasn't written down, helpful to follow up via email, via Teams message, GChat, whatever systems you all use, just to ensure everyone's on the same page. And that's something you can do for your whole team. It doesn't just have to be singled out to one person. You say, hey, thanks so much for the great meeting. Here's a little bit of a recap. And then we have auditory processing disorder. So, in the simplest of terms, this is a type of hearing loss caused by something affecting the part of the brain that processes how you hear. Some complications that folks with auditory processing disorder experience include trouble understanding what people are saying, trouble taking part in activities. Sometimes they'll feel isolated and lonely because of these things. They'll have trouble doing well academically, sometimes trouble doing well like in the workplace, and sometimes they'll feel depressed. So I talk about this because even though it is a specific disorder that folks can be diagnosed with, pieces of this can also be found in folks with autism and or with ADHD. So these strategies that we're going to talk about benefit everyone. Try to have captioning at all your events and meetings. If it's in person, provide an opportunity that it could be captioned so people can fully engage. Getting the information in a couple of different ways is very helpful. Provide materials in advance. Provide printed materials as well as digital to participants that are in your meetings or events as well. At the beginning of this presentation, I shared some info about myself. This was mostly to help you all understand that there's more to me than my disabilities. It's important to connect with people to help them feel more comfortable with you. Don't make assumptions about what people can and cannot do either. The things we have shared so far are things you can do to help folks whether or not they have disclosed a need for them. Accessibility benefits everyone, right? So these are all things that we can just be doing to help everyone and not just one specific person. Okay. Um, Excellent. So, who's ready for some scenarios? Who wants to like go through a scenario and try to come up with like what can we do? What are some things that we can provide in advance? That kind of stuff. Yeah? Woo! Excellent. Okay. So this is where you're going to get a chance to use what you've learned. So I have four different scenarios. I want to try to gauge from folks, do do we want to go into breakout rooms? Do we want to try to go through the scenarios together? How are folks feeling? I'm just seeing some like, oh wow, there's like a whole room of people that just turned a camera on. I was not ready for that. Um, do we want to do breakout rooms? People are like, I don't want to do that. Okay, we can go through them together. We'll go through. Okay, thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much. We're going to go through them together and see what we can come up with. So, scenario one. These are very text heavy, but I wanted to give you all some context so we can see the different pieces that go into it. So, you're an associate director of residential education, overseeing a large team that includes resident directors, area directors, and assistant directors. Your unit recently implemented new policies and procedures related to incident response and programming expectations. You're hosting a meeting to communicate these updates to the team. In previous meetings, you noticed disengagement, staff checking emails, looking confused, or failing to ask questions. Feedback revealed that some team members struggled to follow along with the presentations, found the pace overwhelming, or felt there weren't enough opportunities to ask questions. Additionally, a few staff members have privately shared that they have non-apparent disabilities that make it difficult to process information quickly or retain large amounts of content shared verbally. Your goal for this meeting is to effectively communicate the policy changes, ensure everyone understands their roles, and foster an environment where staff feels engaged, respected, and supported regardless of their needs or communication styles. Your team has diverse learning, communication, and processing styles. While some staff excel in verbal discussions, others may struggle due to conditions such as ADHD, anxiety, or auditory processing challenges. These individuals may not feel comfortable disclosing their needs to the entire team, but have indicated they find large meetings overwhelming. You have all of this info. How would you proceed with communicating the policy changes in a group meeting? If folks want to utilize the chat, or I think you're all able to unmute, Alexis would be able to tell me if that's possible, but um, however folks want to engage, I would like to hear from you all. Okay. Thank you. So send out the info in advance of the meeting so people can read prior to it. In the meeting, break people up into smaller groups to discuss and then bring back to the larger group. Excellent. Excellent strategy. Anyone have any other ideas? Oh, okay. We've got a hand raised. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is the University of Portland and a lot of our residents life team here.
Hello, welcome.
So we had just chatted briefly about some of those same things. In addition, one thing that I found that honestly works for me as someone that has some of those same experiences is bullet points, right? Like what are the most important things that I want my staff to take away, and like bullet pointing and like really creating those guideposts that say like, hey, focus on this. And then in addition to making sure that it's really interactive, doing that knowledge check at the end. So like you had named, asking people to kind of share back what are we proceeding forward with? Where are the questions? That sort of thing.
Excellent. Thank you. I also see in the chat that Max said have a note sheet to hand out, so that way folks have that as well. Um, Anything else that folks want to add? These are all really great strategies. Okay. Who's ready for scenario 2? Woo! Okay, I know. It's like 3 p.m. for folks on the East Coast. It's noon for us on the West Coast. Everyone's like, and it's Friday. Okay, so scenario 2. You are a manager working in the dining center. Alex, a food service worker 1, that's just what our category is at OSU, has an intellectual disability. Alex is enthusiastic about their work and enjoys interacting with others. However, they have been struggling with tasks such as correctly assembling food trays and remembering portions for specific recipes. During a busy lunch shift, Alex makes several mistakes assembling orders, leading to delays and customer complaints. You overhear a coworker, Jamie, express frustration and make a comment about how Alex, quote, shouldn't be working in such a fast-paced environment. Alex seems visibly upset after hearing this, but continues to work. Later, Alex approaches you and says, I feel like I'm messing up a lot. I don't think I'm good at this job. What are some things that you could do when you have a conversation with Alex? How would you move forward from this scenario?
Hi. Sorry, there's just a lot of us, so it's a little easier for me to
No,
unmute.
this is great. Thank you.
One of our folks said engage in a conversation with kind of what kind of learner is he, how does he learn best, kind of revisit some of those training procedures and maybe in a different way, in a way that he might respond to more. So doing a check-in kind of like that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Like that really speaks to like engaging with them and seeing what works specifically for them without making any assumptions, right?
Also,
Um,
I could just
oh,
add
go ahead.
really quickly that I also would just personally would have a conversation with Jamie. Yeah.
Yep. Yes. Excellent. Brooks says, ask Alex if it would be helpful for them to write things down on a note card, like where the trays go or some of the portions, and allow them to use these note cards while working. That's a great idea too. Like what's stopping them from being able to have these little like cheat sheets, right? It's a lot of stuff for people to remember. So why not give them some opportunities like that? And then Christopher says, I'd reassure Alex that their enthusiasm and attitude are real strengths and let them know we can adjust tasks or provide tools so they can feel more confident. I'd also address the disrespectful comment with Jamie and keep coaching Alex with clear steps and support so they feel valued and successful in their role. Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, the other piece is making sure that we follow up with Jamie too, right? Because that we don't want anyone to feel that way. So, excellent. All right. Scenario 3. So, a little bit similar to scenario 1, but let's see if anyone has other ideas. You are the Assistant Director of Occupancy Management, managing a team of assignments coordinators who are responsible for student housing assignments. One of your direct reports, Kay, is highly effective in their role and often brings insightful ideas during one-on-one meetings with you. However, in larger team meetings, they tend to stay quiet and avoid contributing to discussions. Recently, Kay reached out to you privately and shared that they struggle to process information during fast-paced meetings. They feel overwhelmed trying to absorb what's being shared while also formulating responses on the spot. Kay mentions they want to participate more, but need additional time to think through their contributions. Your team holds weekly meetings to discuss ongoing projects, upcoming deadlines, and issues affecting housing assignments. These meetings often involve brainstorming solutions and making decisions quickly. You want to support K's need for additional processing time while ensuring that the team discussions remain productive and inclusive. What are some things that you can do to help support Kay and your team? Maxwell, thank you. Ensure the agenda is shared ahead of the meeting with the entire team. Yes, that is one of my favorite things is when I get an agenda in advance, so I get some time to process and think through what I'm going to say. Any other suggestions? Oh, got another comment. Start with a journaling.
Sorry, I'm trying to interact in different ways.
No, you're okay.
Start with like a opportunity to do some individual journaling or reflecting before you dive into a group discussion so that people can get their thoughts out.
Excellent. Okay. And then I'm also seeing ask Kay and the team what would work best for them. Do decisions have to be made during the meeting, or could additional time be given after the meeting for additional input? Great point. Start thinking about like, okay, does this decision actually have to be made in this very moment, or could we give a little bit more processing time? Like, let's start the conversation, and do we have to make a decision right in this moment? A lot of times, we don't have to make it right in that very moment, but there are some times where we have to. Excellent. Okay. Scenario 4. You're planning an off-campus team bonding event for your staff. Some of your staff have mobility issues that they have disclosed to you, but they do not have accommodations related to them. During a team meeting, you present the idea of a group hike at a popular nearby trail. Some team members enthusiastically agree, but you notice a few staff members look hesitant. Later, one staff member privately tells you they're worried they won't be able to participate due to the trail's steep incline. Another staff member mentions they don't want to be singled out or feel like a burden to the group. You want to ensure the bonding activity is fun and inclusive for everyone while balancing the interests of the team. How would you manage this? Find a new activity. Have two activity options. Pick a different activity. That's what I would do. Excellent. Okay.
One of our hall directors also suggested trying a less strenuous hike, right? Like, could we start at a base level? Because there are many, like, I'm in a power wheelchair. There's still in Portland in the area, there are many places that my chair can navigate. And I know that people with like different kinds of mobility issues also would be able to navigate while it's still giving some of that hiking. Exactly, like the comments, right? Maybe just walk on a very flat terrain.
Yes. No, that is excellent. Ask for ideas from the group instead of presenting something without feedback. Yes, Stephen. Yes. Get some feedback from people. Excellent. Okay. Any other thoughts? These are all fantastic. No? Okay. So, oh, we've got a long one. I'll read this one before we move on. So Christopher says, I'd acknowledge the concerns and reframe the purpose of the outing. The goal is team bonding, not physical challenge. I'd explore inclusive options like choosing a flat, accessible walking path, a picnic in a park, or an activity with multiple levels of participation. I'd bring this back to the team. That way, you balance enthusiasm for being outdoors with accessibility, and staff don't feel spotlighted or excluded. Great idea. Yes, we're getting some round of applause. Great idea, Christopher. Okay, we've done some cool scenarios. You've got a lot of information. So now let's think about what have we learned today? Oh, so I want to see how folks are feeling, first of all. It's a little bit hard for me to gauge, but maybe if folks are comfortable and you're like on video. I usually use like a thumbs up voting system to see thumbs up means I feel good about the material and I can implement something into my work. Thumbs to the side means I'm unsure about this material, how it can be applied to my work. And then thumbs down means none of this can be applied to my work and you've just wasted like 48-ish minutes of my life. I won't be offended if folks are like, well, it's okay. Yes, okay. I've got a whole room of people. Thank you. I'm getting some thumbs up. Great. So let's think about what is one thing that you can take from this presentation that you can implement into your daily work starting now, over the next month, over the next year. So Maxwell says, thinking more strategically about presenting information in meetings to ensure everyone is able to digest and respond and share. That is a great takeaway. Any other thoughts of takeaways? It doesn't have to be this giant revelation, right? Sometimes making these changes comes in really like short, small doses. You might be like, oh, I never really thought to put captioning on when I'm hosting an in-person meeting that has a presentation. Or, I always have an agenda in advance, but I forget to share it. Like, doesn't have to be this earth-shattering revelation.
Something that I actually commented on at the beginning of your presentation is that you modeled a great example of an image description. And that's something that while I always try and make my presentations accessible, I definitely skip over that piece quite often. And so it was just a reminder for me to like include that in there.
Yes, thank you. I have no idea where everybody's like video went and you all just disappeared from me all of a sudden, but I can see that there's still people here. New thought process on how to have conversations with my accommodations office. Excellent. Oh, okay, there we go. You all popped back up. I don't know what happened. You like disappeared for a minute and I clicked something else in the chat and now everyone's here again. Uh, Continuing to ask for constructive, ongoing feedback and realizing that as lifelong learners within leadership roles, we are co-creating spaces for belonging to take place. Yes, thank you, Stephen. And then Christopher, slowing down in meetings, sharing things in advance in bite-sized chunks. I share too much info in advance and it's too much. Also more inclusive practices so it's normalized. I often struggle with the like, I'm going to give you all of the information because that helps me process, but I don't often think about how overwhelming it might be for someone else. Excellent. Anything else that folks want to share? These are all really great, and I'm glad to hear that people are at least getting something to take back.
One of the things that I really wanted to appreciate about your presentation is the emphasis on the conversation piece of it and like letting people self-identify. Because something that I've been thinking a lot about and like my scope of work is the experience of like dueling or competing needs, right? Where it's like on a base level, we have a student that needs to fidget so that they can learn and a student who needs quiet to learn, right? Neither
Hmm.
one of those things is wrong. And yet, if they're roommates together, right, then that can be really challenging.
Right.
And then when you add in things like the experience of disability or different identity, like it just continues to complicate it. And the frustrating answer sometimes, but also like the important one is that there isn't one single process that we can kind of create for that. And so I really appreciated just like that emphasis on like talking to people and figuring it out, even if it isn't something that like we make that process for everyone, but at least we know that we have it.
Yeah. No, that is a huge piece. The conversations are so important because you just don't know what folks' lived experiences and like needs are. We can make assumptions, not awesome to do that. And there's also things that we can do to try to make things more accessible. And then that opens the door for other conversations. If they see that you're willing to make these adjustments and you're trying really hard to make this an open and equitable space, people are more likely to say, oh, this is a safe person that I can have this conversation with. All right. So I'm going to put in the chat the presentation that has some spelling errors and things. So apologies for that. But the reason I want to share this with you all is because I have resources for disability laws and acts by country and area, accessibility laws around the world. They have like kind of a global overview. If any of you have to manage a website for your department, checking the Accessibility free website access scan helps you see where your gaps are and like, oh, are these headings not listed correctly? Could someone with a screen reader use this? Contrast checker for fonts. I have two options for it. The first one, WebAIM, is a little bit more in depth than the Coolers one. Strategies for working with people with disabilities, persons with IDDs, ADA resources, Section 508, which we didn't fully touch on, but there's a whole section about creating accessible meetings and then making events accessible if you host large-scale events on your campus or even small in-hall events, different ways to do that. And then my page of my sources. Lots of time, lots of rambling. Thank you for being here. If folks ever want to talk more about this topic, please reach out to me. I could do this all day. If this could be my full-time job, it would be. I love talking about accessibility, equity, inclusion. It's a huge passion area of mine. So please send me an email, find me on LinkedIn. If you want to collaborate and try to talk through something that's going on and you want some support, you're like, hey, this thing came up and I'm trying to figure out how we can make adjustments. Like, happy to help. So again, thank you all for being here. This is a huge step in the right direction for you all. And like this shows that you really care about the work you're doing and you want to make your spaces more accessible and inclusive for everyone. So thank you. Have a wonderful weekend and enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully, folks don't have too many things after this now.
Awesome, awesome. Well, everybody, please join me in thanking Allie for her fantastic presentation. And that's a wrap for our best of showcase. So thank you for finishing us up strong, Allie. These recordings for all of the best of showcase presentations will be on our Cool Eye YouTube channel. I am going to put the link to the playlist in the chat, and they should all be uploaded by the end of the day. So if you'd like to go back and watch this presentation or any of the others, you can find them there. And then, yeah, thank you everybody for being here. Have a fantastic weekend.